Maybe some of you do not know Abuna Daniel. معنا Abuna Daniel Ebrahim. Abuna Daniel actually was ordained last year in Thomas Sunday. So it's almost 1 year. And he's from Nashville, St. Demiana Church in Nashville. And he came to be with you the rest of the convention. And since it is a question and answer session, so I'm going to join عشان اشوف هتجاوب ازاي. No pressure. So now if you have any questions, written or verbal.
If anybody wants to ask about high words and start with
You can raise your hand. If you don't have questions, then you leave.
Mary.
Mary.
I guess I'm starting. It doesn't have to be about the topic, does it? No. Okay. It doesn't have to be about the topic of women, does it?
No. You can ask about anything.
Okay, I have two questions, and I think one, like the second one, is related to the first one. But we were reading this morning in the prophecies the story of Abraham sacrificing Isaac. And so my first question is, why, when God told Abraham, I'm going to destroy these cities, Abraham had this whole back and forth negotiation with God, oh no, if there's 50 people, if there's 10 people, a full discussion. But when God said sacrifice Isaac, okay. So that's my first question. And then what kind of leads into that is, when can we kind of have these negotiations with God? And when do we just accept what he says? And the example I was thinking of was King Hezekiah. When God said you're going to die, Hezekiah was like, no. God was like, okay, you can live 15 more years. So kind of, that's my question.
For your first question, actually, Abraham knew that God is disappointed with Sodom and Gomorrah because of their sins. And that's why he wanted to destroy them. But as for Isaac, he knew and God is not actually disappointed with Abraham or with Isaac, that's why he wanted to kill him. But he is testing his faith and his love. And that's why Abraham was not reluctant at all to offer his son. But St. Paul actually mentioned a very important point, that Abraham believed and trusted that God actually will raise Isaac even if he offered him as a sacrifice. So Abraham he believed even if he killed Isaac, God will raise him from the death and will give him back. Because God promised Abraham that in Isaac, your seed will be like the sand of the sea. So for Isaac, he did not actually interceded for his life, because he knew even if he killed him, God will raise him. But for Sodom and Gomorrah, he interceded on their behalf because he knew God is angry with them. But also he knew if they repented, God will forgive them. And God was willing to forgive them, but he did not find even 10 persons. God is not a dictator. And God allows us to talk and to negotiate with him, like Hezekiah, like Moses. When God wanted to destroy Israel, he told him, don't do this. So, yes, we can actually share with God our opinion. We can tell God what we want. But at the end, we should trust God that if he said no, this will be for our benefit. This is the plan of God. And yes, God gave Hezekiah 15 years, but St. Paul, when he asked God to heal him from his infirmity, God told him, no, I want you to be ill, because my grace is made perfect in weakness. Okay?
One question here was, how can you maintain kindness, gentleness, softness when you are working in an aggressive environment? It can be perceived as weakness and maybe hold you back from career advancement. It depends on how you understand kindness, gentleness, and softness. So if it's a core value that you understand kindness as a virtue, softness as a virtue, gentleness as a virtue, Christ asks us to be gentle like doves. So if you understand this as a virtue in the middle of an aggressive environment, then you continue to practice those virtues, because it's not going to detract you from practicing them. If your friend or your colleague is sick, you're still going to care about them and ask about them. If they're overwhelmed with work, you're still going to help them out. But at the same time, if the environment is aggressive, you have to be assertive enough to have boundaries. You have to set your boundaries at work while maintaining the kindness, the softness, and gentleness that Christ commands. And there's so many examples of people in the work environment that maintain the spirit of Christ, and the environment is so poisonous. The environment is very negative, but they give a spirit, they actually make the whole environment change because of them. Some people, they're not at work, people recognize this person's not at work today, that's why the workplace doesn't feel the same. It's because of that gentleness and softness and kindness that they get from Christ. And like we're gonna talk about later, it's the fragrance of Christ that you spread where you are. You guys want to add it?
I have 4 questions here. Your Grace mentioned in the first lecture that submission is the role of the woman. Therefore, if the man does not lead, how does the woman submit? What should she do at that point? Sometimes the man cannot lead because the woman is sitting in the driver's seat. So she needs actually to go to the passenger seat so he can take the driver's seat and start the driving. That's one reason. Another thing actually, some women should be supportive. For example, if the man is not a leader, but by her support and by her nurture, she actually can help him to lead. And she can actually hint to him at the beginning, how he should make decisions or whatever. And gradually, like supporting him, training him in order to take this leader position. As I spoke about Priscilla and Aquila, when they know Apollos is lacking some preciseness in the way of the Lord, they took him and trained him. So she can support her husband to be the leader of the house. Why don't we have deaconesses in the southern diocese? Because the deaconess should be widow and 60 years old, and that's what the scripture said. And now actually we have, because His Holiness Pope Shenouda ordained some deaconesses, I think in year 1980, or 80, not 81, 80. But he found, at this age, they are too old and they need somebody to serve them. So the Holy Synod actually start to study the possibility of having consecrated sisters to do the work of the deaconess. And actually in the Southern Diocese, we have consecrated sisters. And I think 2 of them are attending this retreat with us. So we do have consecrated sisters in the Southern Diocese, if you don't know. Will there be boarding seminary at the convent like in the Abbey? The boarding seminary, it's boarding actually, so they live in the seminary with the purpose to prepare them to be priests. But we don't have women priesthood. So, but there is seminary for women. We have one in Florida and one in Nashville. In Nashville is Arabic and in Florida is English. So you can apply to either one, either in Florida or in Nashville. Will the rehab center in Florida expand to include female patients? It is in our plan to start a rehab center for females, but the same center cannot be for females and males at the same time. But I was told by many experts that having a rehab center for females is very challenging. So I think we need to be ready for this step before we start. But it is in our plan, God willing.
All these questions for you, Chris. They're specifically asking for you. Specifically asking Sayyidina to answer. There's a question here. Sometimes it's hard to balance all our roles and not get discouraged when we know what we are meant to be in this world, but we feel we aren't measuring up. What do you recommend? So this is a very good question, because it all depends on how you define your role is. Because some of us see themselves and their whole self-image is based on their job, or their whole self-image is based on them being a mother, or they're being a homemaker, or whatever. So when that self was not measuring up in that one department, they feel that they're failures. They're not really doing what they're supposed to do. But when they see that their whole goal in life is to know God and make people in their home know Him, and make people in their work know Him, and make everybody else know Him, home is a place to serve God, church is a place to serve God, work is a place to serve God, the kids are a place to teach them about God and get to know God, then life all of a sudden have a totally different meaning. Even if you had a hard day, you know that God is there for you, and you feel you're still under His wings, and you're under His shadow. So it goes right back to how you define your self-image. How do you see yourself? Do you see yourself as a daughter of God who's trying to spread His fragrance everywhere, or you're just a mother or a worker somewhere?
You mentioned in the first lecture that Adam and Eve trained them to love someone different than themselves, learn how to love God. If one does not get married, how can they learn or experience this? Actually, when I spoke at Adam and Eve, they're only Adam and Eve in the whole world. But now, love is not limited in marriage. Even people who are unmarried or like consecrated their life to God, like nuns and monks, they deal with different people, deal with both genders, and they actually know how to deal with those who are different and learn how to love God through loving one another. So loving one another is a school actually to help us how to love God. Second question, actually I don't understand it. If women were treated or perceived as objects, how were they able to build cities? Actually, that's a wrong perception. I'm not saying it's a good perception to perceive women as objects. But I said Israel, because the law of God honored and respected women. So in the Old Testament, maybe Israel was the only nation that respected women. That's why they were able to build cities. That's what I was saying. But unfortunately, in the contemporary society, actually, they look, most of them, and they look at women like objects. You said that Orthodox women are meant to be women, not men. What does it practically look like to act like a woman, and what does it mean to act like a man? In everything, when she lives for the purpose that God actually created her for. As I said, the spirit of motherhood, the spirit of gentleness, the spirit of teaching, the spirit of being virtuous, the spirit of being delicate and kind and nurturing and supportive, counselor. All this that spoke in the first lecture, even in her appearance, the harshness and to be tough like men. As I said, Pope Shenouda لما قال ليس جيدا للعصفور أن يزأر ولا للأسد أن يغرد. So everybody should live his own calling and act according to the purpose for which he's created. I think the feminist movement don't understand between equality in essence and equality in roles. Essence, all of us are the same before God. All of us created in the image and likeness of God. As St. Paul said in Galatians, there is no male or female. But when we speak about roles, no, we are created for different roles. The role of man in society is different than the role of woman. I like to liken it like the heart and the brain. Both organs are very, very essential to your life. If the heart stopped, person will die. If the brain stopped, person dies. But the function of the brain is totally different than the function of the heart, although both are dependent on each other. The brain is dependent on the heart for the blood supply. And if the brain did not get the blood supply from the heart, we call it a stroke. And the brain will stop functioning properly. In the same way, the heart is depending on the brain in regulating the heartbeats. And if the brain actually sent the wrong message to the heart, atrial fibrillation or tachycardia or whatever will risk the person's life. So both organs depend on each other, and they are different, but they are connected and both are essential. If the heart said, I like to be brain, and so there will be two brains and no heart, it doesn't work. Or if the brain said, I'll be heart and no brain, it doesn't work. That's why, brain should function as a brain, heart should function as a heart. Both of them are dependent on each other.
If you are serving with another servant and you struggle from the way they serve, what's your advice as the main part that that bother me from the other servant is that when it's a real service, they want to run from it, and when it's just to be for show, they run for it. So, in service, like the simplest and the most genuine advice is just always remind yourself you are working with God and for God. You should not occupy yourself with what anybody else does. You should only occupy yourself if you're faithful to your service or not. Maybe part of your faithfulness to the service is going to teach that servant how to be faithful too. And if he sees you faithful day in and day out, they will learn from you. So always in service, hold yourself accountable before God and do not look around.
Sorry, may I ask a question added to that question?
Sure.
It's a good question. In terms of like generational differences, and not even generational differences, in terms of culture of women.
I struggle with sometimes our community not being able to separate culture from faith. And sometimes there are things that are taught in church that I don't believe are of the gospel. I don't, and I see it pushing youth away. I see it deterring youth from coming to youth meeting or from coming to church. And I've seen people leave the church because of things like that. But when you're young and you're a servant, I can't necessarily speak up to someone who's my elder. Right? So there's issues of culture, but then there's issues of like being respectful. How do you deal with that?
So when you talk about culture, what specific example? Like, give me a specific example, and so Ms. Grace can.
More so on my experiences with dealing with youth. So speaking in servants who may bring their cultural bias into a meeting or lectures or talk that aren't founded in faith. And then if a youth questions that, then the youth is shunned. But the youth is actually asking a good question.
What's the first example?
Yeah, like,
I'm struggling with thinking of a concrete example right now. But I think a lot of times just in general, we tell youth, stay away from this is bad, but we don't want to talk about why. Right? So we just tell them like, and we teach that to kids from when they're young, instead of, why should you stay away from this?
okay, sorry, I thought you had So I understand the generational difference. I mean, that exists everywhere. But
مثلا like aggression towards Muslims. That's actually a valid recent example.
Yeah. So two things. I think we're responsible for those servants, for their salvation, and we're also responsible for the youth. And that's really between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah.
So with the older servants, and my very, 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 very humble experience, and His Grace can elaborate on that, if you're respectful and loving, and you sit with them and talk to them, it makes a huge difference. But you have to be humble, respectful, and loving. With the youth, meeting with them separately and talking to them and explaining to them the cultural difference, they're more perceptive. Yeah, we get it. It's a different culture, so understand it. And that usually gets you out of most trouble. But you have to do both with love and respect. And even when we talk to the youth about the older servants, you have to be very loving.
Well, I won't speak about the servants.
If they come up, you have to be very loving and respectful of them. And when you do that, you win both teams. But by God's grace, yeah.
Thank you.
When ordaining priests, that is their purpose. The candidate, congregation, bishop must approve. But what if you feel like God is calling you to a purpose that your family, friends do not approve of? For example, being a full-time missionary abroad. If this is a true calling from God, actually, God will speak in the heart of others. And I can share with you a personal experience. When actually I felt God is calling me to become a monk, I went to the monastery first time without getting the approval of my family. And when they heard about it, they became very, very upset, disappointed, and they came to the monastery insisting on taking me back with them. And I went to my spiritual father there, and I asked him, what should I do? And he told me, you trust God? I told him, of course I trust him. He told me, if this is your calling, then God actually will speak in their hearts and they will approve it. And if it is not, then it is not. And actually, I returned back to the world with them, and I stayed about 6 months praying and asking God, if it is my way, you need actually to change the hearts of my family. If it is not my way, change my heart. But at the end, all of us should have the same revelation from you. And at the end, actually, after 6 months, they came to me and they blessed this step to go and become a monk. So, if your family, your friends, etc., etc., as I said, do not approve it, just wait and keep praying for the will of God. And get also the direction from your spiritual father and trust God. And God can change hearts. If it is a real calling, God will change hearts.
Being a mother of 3 young kids, it's very refreshing to have this weekend to actually pray and have quiet time. Usually on Sundays during the liturgy with the kids, I feel angry and upset all during liturgy because of the kids. How can I benefit and pray with the kids acting out? Do I just accept this? This is a real problem. This is a real, and it's very hard, and you're not going to understand it unless you experience it. And how it feels to really want to pray and lift up your heart to God, and the kids are just nagging you the whole time. But it is true, this is a season that's going to be over. God willing, the kids will grow, and you're going to get past that. And you're going to appreciate those times that you're actually standing before God in quietness and able to pray. You're going to really feel that this is a gift from God. But also, during those times, you were able to give yourself a break this weekend and arrange for somebody to take care of the kids and be able to pray. You have to give yourself those breaks too. You have to be able to once in a while arrange with your family or friends or somehow take care of the kids during the liturgy just for 2 hours for you to spend time with God and pray and just focus. Because you have to always recharge yourself spiritually, or else it's going to be a very long 2 or 3 years until they're able to grow and stand in church.
I'm sorry, we have a question back here. Is that okay?
Monica.
That was mine. Marie from the card says may or may not be my question. Although sometimes mistaken for feminism and or discontentment, should Orthodox women fight against gender disparity in society? So for example, differences in pay or obtaining leadership roles in their careers?
Difference in pay, yes, you should fight for it. And I think, to answer your question, before fighting or defending, you should ask yourself, what is the will of God in this area? And if this is the will of God, like I give you the example this morning of the daughters of Salafhat, they fought for their inheritance. And actually God gives them more than what they asked. And He gives them the right to have inheritance and to pass the inheritance to their offspring as equal as men. So you need to pray and see what's God's will. And if it's God's will, yes, to fight for it, yes, go and fight for it. Nothing wrong with that. But fight for it in a Christian way, of course. Nothing wrong with it. I will ask another question. Why are no women mentioned in the commemoration of the saints in the liturgy other than Saint Mary? Because the commemoration of saints is not designed to mention all the people. Saint George is not mentioned in the commemoration of the saint. Saint Philobatier, Marcurius, Saint Mina, all these great martyrs, they are not mentioned. So it's not about men and women. It's about, heroes of faith and the leaders of monasticism. That's what they are mentioned. But in the commemoration of saints in the midnight praises, it has men and women, male and female.
What are the main roles or qualities men are gifted with that complement a woman's skills? Not much, no, just kidding. So there's so much to be said about the father figure. And so many of the broken families and the kids that end up in bad places, when you ask them what was the one thing missing from your life, they say a good father figure. Like their father may be there, but he's not there. Like he's not. So there's so much to be said about that. So that fatherhood, just like motherhood, that fatherhood figure is huge. That's the best quality that complement the woman's qualities.
I think كمل على قولنا دانيال قالوا that's why in Nashville we started actually a weekly meeting for men to teach them and about the importance of the figure of the father in the household. And this goes actually with a question here. I particularly appreciated the lecture this morning on the role of women in the world, and particularly in a marriage. I feel this was beneficial for us women to hear, but would also be incredibly beneficial for the men to hear as well, and may reduce conflict in marriage in regards to different beliefs of submission. Would the church consider offering a men's retreat to focus on these issues, or even begin installing these values in your boys when they are young? Yes, I agree on this. مش كده بقول لكم احنا ابتدينا نعمل men meeting في ناشفيل, وده will be developed also to be يعني بإذن الله ليهم retreat وكده.
It's a long question, so I'm just going to summarize it. It's about the liturgy and the offering of the lamb. The priest prays for inaudibly for God to show his face upon the bread and wine and convert them. And then again, it's prayed again in the liturgy of the faithful. So he's saying if it already happened in the offering of the lamb, why is the priest repeating the same prayer to God? In the offering of the lamb, the priest praying is saying that you may do that you're gonna do that. There's no conversion yet. But then at the time of the epiclesis, the descension of the Holy Spirit, that's the time in the liturgy of the faithful when the Holy Spirit descends on us, and the bread and wine converts them to the body and blood of Christ.
When non-Copts see the Coptic Church and see that women cannot become priests, they say the Coptic Church is not equal for men and women. How can this be defended in arguing that they are equal? Again, the confusion here between equality in essence and equality in rules. Here the confusion is about the equality in rules. If there is equality in rules, then why God created two different genders? Men has role in the church and women has role in the church. And we'll speak tomorrow about the role of the church. But having different roles doesn't mean they are not equal. If you think about it, if just you forget about the priesthood, almost every other service is taken by women. So God actually protected this by law so we can have something for ourselves.
I often find it very hard to focus during the liturgy. Every time I try to focus, I find my mind wandering. Basically, what can I do with this problem? The liturgy is a process, it's a prayer. It's like when the surgeon is operating, it's a process. It's going through a whole phase of process from starting, prepping the room, getting the room ready, doing the actual surgery, finishing up, surgery is done. So if you understand that and prepare your heart while the priest preparing for the offering, you're getting your heart ready, you're thinking about what I'm bringing to the church. For example, we were talking last week in one of the meetings about from the minute you walk into the church, you have to start getting yourself ready. For example, Christ said, if you remember that your brother sinned against you, leave the altar and go back. How are you going to have time to think about what you did wrong against anybody if you don't give yourself that time? So the minute you walk into the door of the church, you're supposed to praying certain psalms and thinking about getting yourself ready to stand before God. From the minute you walk into the door of the church, and give yourself time to clean yourself and clean your heart and purify your thoughts. So that's the first step. During the liturgy, also make the prayers relevant to you. Yeah, for example, if Abuna is praying, is praying the commemoration of the saints and asking for St. Mary and remembering St. Mary, St. John, ask those people to pray for you on the spot. I'm sure you have an issue or you have a problem that you need help with. Abuna is mentioning their name right there in the commemoration. Say, St. Mary, remember this problem. St. John the Baptist, remember this. And that's how you make the liturgy part of your personal life, part of your personal prayer.
You mentioned that women are a vessel for life. What about the women who cannot bear children? As you know, illness entered into the world as part of a result of the fall of Adam and Eve. So this was not the original plan of God. So when women actually cannot bear children because of illness, this actually part of the consequences of the fall of Adam and Eve, and that we are suffering. That's why we die physically. That's why all of us we get ill at certain point in our life, etc., etc. Or what about women who do not want to have their own child? Actually, I have a reservation about this. Because the book of Psalms says, children are a gift from God, inheritance from the Lord. Al-Banun mirathun min al-Rabb. So God wants to give you a gift. Why you should say no to God? وبعدين بيجي question, but to adopt children who have no home or have been abandoned. Christianity is not against adoption. Actually, we support adoption. And if there is opportunity to adopt, that is good. But this will not replace, to have your biological son or daughter. Do we not, as Christians, have a social responsibility? Yes, we do. To help those in need? Yes, we do. And that's why you cannot adopt all these children. That's why there are orphanages that run by Christian churches. So, like in refusing to have your own children, I think this is not the will of God. البنون ميراث من الرب. ثمرة البطن عطية منه. That's what the psalm says. The fruit of the womb is a gift from God. So who can say no to God's gift?
As a working mother, I go home around 5, try to get kids to do the homework from after school, and I cook, etc. How do I take care of my kids' spiritual needs in this busy and stressful day-by-day scenario? What are some simple, realistic things to do with them? So I'm sure a lot of people relate to that, just the day is too short. The days kind of run back to back. The simplest thing to do and the most realistic thing to do. Just like you make time to do the homework, the time doesn't have to be long that you spend with them spiritually. For example, if you read just for 10 minutes before bed, 10 minutes, I'm sure you tell them a story before they go to bed. Instead of doing that story, you can just literally, there's so many nice Orthodox Bibles for kids with nice pictures, and the story is very nice, nicely abbreviated. If you just read, it literally takes like 2.5 minutes to read. And if you read it with them every night, that's huge. That really gets them in the habit of reading the Bible. If you just stand to pray with them and they see you standing and you do that for even a few minutes before they go to bed. It doesn't have to be the whole, be a prayer. Just something short. Just say the Thanksgiving prayer with them and pray for the family or the friends, whoever needs prayer. For them to experience that's a huge spiritual benefit for them, and you're raising up spiritually.
You mentioned the story of Moses' wife circumcising her son to save him. I once read an interpretation of this that said it is likely that the son was not circumcised because of the wife and her disbelief. Does this have inaccuracy? Even if this has an accuracy, but as I said, we should obey God more than men. So Moses actually should emphasize the importance of circumcising their son because that is the law of God. But actually, I commend this wife, even if at the beginning she was against it, but when actually she saw that God is displeased with this, she went ahead and circumcised her son to hear the will of God. There are two questions here I'd like to address. They are about the same topic. I know I have talked a lot about our value even if we are not married. However, this fear is always there. And loneliness is such a monster. How can we, being single, really find a fulfillment? And I don't mean keeping ourselves busy at church because I consider this a way of escape rather than facing our fears. Another question, the same topic. Thanks for blessing us this retreat. Several of us are in our 20s to 40s and are single. This is a unique situation in the past decade or so. What would your grace advise us? Many of us feel that life is at a standstill until God sends us someone. However, should we use this opportunity to form together to foster children, take a year off from work to serve? Actually, I'm against the whole idea to put your life on hold waiting for someone. Because again, you have a value and you have a purpose. And you need to pursue this value and this purpose. And you move on with your life. And when God sends this person in the right time, then actually he will join this journey and will continue our journey. I know it is easy to be said than to be left. I understand this. And as the other question said, loneliness is a monster. But when actually we pursue the purpose for which we are called, and it's not just to be in the church, as you said, 24/7, but you need to set your goal, to define your purpose in life, and live for this purpose. Once you will find meaning in your life by fulfilling the purpose of God, actually your life will be enjoyable. Yes, it is not the norm, because God said it's not for man to be alone, and also it's not good for the woman to be alone. God created us with relational souls. But if this is the situation, I should actually accept it, live with it, and move on with my life. In our life, we will face many, many challenges. some people, their life get stuck with these challenges, and they wait until this challenge is resolved. This is not the right approach. But the right approach is to accept the current situation and live my life to its fullest, to glorify God and to live for the purpose I'm created for. And this actually will help you to overcome and to adapt to this situation in which you are in. And we are praying actually to God that in His grace and in His mercy actually to help to solve this situation for many, many people.
The question here that basically deals with envy and feeling inadequate and always looking at others and comparing yourself to others and that getting to you. The whole issue with envy and feeling inadequate goes back to the person's self-image when they sit with themselves. There must be someone driving that. And their self-image is usually based on one trait that they're basing their whole self-image on. It could be like getting to a grad school, or how they look, or they're getting engaged, if they're engaged or not, or if they're married or not. So usually the self-image is solely based on one trait. And somehow their mind is so closed that they're basing their entire self-image on that one thing. And they compare everybody else based on that one trait. So of course they're going to feel inadequate because they're only looking at that one trait. But it goes back to the person sitting with themselves and resetting that self-image. Okay, and that self-image, Christ already, St. Paul told us, you were purchased with a price. Our whole self-image was glorified 1,000 times when Christ paid that price for us. Can you imagine if you were worth that Christ would die for you, what your self-image would be like? So always remind yourself that Christ died personally for you. Like on the cross, He had you in His mind when He was dying as a person. So that should reset your self-image. The second thing is about comparisons. Try to train yourself. Like you go to the gym and learn how to exercise. Try to stop your mind from comparing people right at the offset. Some people wait until they already have made the comparison and thought about it, and then they feel guilty afterward. Try to stop it. Say, I'm not going to do that. I'm comfortable with myself. I love myself for who I am. I love that person too for who they are. I should not ever compare apples and oranges. I should compare myself with myself. I should have my own goals and try to achieve my own goals. But I should not have anybody else's life affect how I feel about myself.
Is there a difference between God-given gift and talent? As St. James said, every talent and every gift is coming from God. But for the non-believers, they used the talent for their own adornment. But the believers, they use the talent for the glory of God and to serve one another. And also, the believers may receive a special gift more than the non-believers for the edifying of the Church of God. Sayyidina, I feel there is a need to be addressed in our Coptic women congregation. It is the difficulties women encounter when their children grow up and leave the home. How to deal with the feeling of emptiness and loss. That's what they call empty nest syndrome. Yes, I think this is a big need. But again, I think there was a question in the second lecture about do I have only one purpose in life, or in every stage in my life there is a purpose? So even in this stage, there is a purpose for you. Once you find this purpose and you live for it, this actually will make meaning for your life. But I think this issue needs to be addressed. Maybe we need to speak about it in more detail.
How do you fulfill the role and the purpose of women in a Christian manner when the men in our lives don't agree or lack knowledge to support our goals? For example, in Egyptian culture, sometimes men have deep perceptions that women is less equal to men. So that whole idea of having a men retreat is probably a good idea for the person to attend it. But also getting that person closer to God, believe it or not. When the person gets closer to God and genuinely embraces God, their heart softens. And some cultural things that you would not think they're even acceptable, that he's going to realize that and see it himself. The other thing is also like communicating with that person and talking to him and trying to open up and have honest conversations. Like, do not just assume that, he's doing that and we're going to just neglect it and things are going to take care of themselves. Just try to have a loving, kind, well-versed discussion about this and why this is coming from and how he feels that way. Usually these things help.
What's your Grace view on being a foster parent after your kids grow? يعني nothing wrong with that. But then another question, views on surrogate mother. This is actually, there is a debate about it. Because surrogate mothers, there are many different ways for surrogate mothers. There is a debate, and his Holiness Pope Tawadros actually formed a committee from 12 bishops who had medical background to study all these medical issues and make a recommendation for the Holy Synod. And this is one on the list actually that His Holiness assigned to us. But another question also on our paper, if I am vessel for birth life, but I have not yet found my mate while I'm waiting and living my life, is it wrong to freeze my eggs so that I can still conceive later? Actually, this issue also, we are asked to study it in this committee, and hopefully we can make a recommendation soon to the Holy Synod about all these issues. I have a list of about maybe 12 issues like this. I heard something or a theory about how the reason for Satan's pride was because God showed the angels his plan to become man, and some of the angels could not handle this idea of serving human being and were jealous. That's why they felt prideful. What does the church saying about this theory? If the theory is not biblical and not supported by church fathers, then we don't accept it. So that's something, stipulation, but has nothing about the truth. Does the church approve cremation? No, because your body is anointed with the holy oil and is a temple for the Holy Spirit. And cremation, if you study it in history, it started as actually rebel against the idea of resurrection. That's how now it's done for economic reason. But historically it started because people rebelled against the idea of resurrection. God honored our bodies, even the relics of Elisha, the prophet, raised a person from death. And God honored our bodies. That's why the church is against cremation. Why did we read the book of Tobia today? Because the miracle of opening the eyes of Tobia, which actually is a symbol of enlightenment, and this Sunday is the Sunday of enlightenment, Sunday of baptism, the man who was born blind. So the link between the miracle of Tobia was healed from his blindness and baptism and the story of the man who was born blind. Some more questions? I'm not sure it's 10.
There's one in the crowd that's been
No?
There's a question in the crowd that's been.
طيب خلينا نرفع.
It's for me. Okay, I actually have a couple, but I'll try and make them quick. Sorry, they're very quick. Okay, so the first one, it kind of goes to the women with children in church. What is the reason, because I've heard different things from different priests, the reason for the men on one side and the women on one side? Because I've attended churches where the families sit together and it's a lot more cohesive, and I think it gives both parents an equal opportunity to pray during the liturgy since it's a tag team situation.
Actually, the regulation in the church is that everybody has his own place. The priests has their own place, deacons has their own place. When the king was Christian, has his own place, bishop has his own place, men has their own place, women have their own place, etc. And this has actually nothing to do with the culture. It is the canons of the apostles. And it's interesting, right now actually, many Protestant churches are going back to this tradition. If you just open any browser and just write separate seating in the church, you will find many Protestant churches are supporting going back to this tradition, and they are giving actually wonderful reasons why we should keep the two genders separate from each other. As for families and keeping children, some churches actually, they allow families to sit like in the back of the church as together on the crying room to help when both of them need help to take care of their children.
As a woman, I like to be separated than men so I can focus on God and don't worry about men looking at me or saying how stand, how I sit. So I like to be separate from them.
That's one of the reasons they mentioned in support. I'm serious, in support of separate seating. Yes.
I have one too, actually, a reason. I realize this. Oops, sorry. I realize this more as the wife of the priest, that when I'm taking care of the kids on my side, I just imagine if everybody was there with their husband, or like for the single moms in in our church, I just imagine them watching all of us perfect, complete little families and like just having that. So I really feel for them, which I didn't notice before because we would stand in the back and we would share the childcare. So just another thing.
But in essence, this isn't a cultural thing, it is actually part of the canon.
It is not, yes, it's part of the canons, yes.
Okay. Second question is, I'm not engaging in debate at all, I'm just going to preface that. The idea of equality in the church, what is the reason, I know it's in Leviticus, but the reason for the 40 and 80 days with the baptisms and the progress being made towards possibly eliminating that? I don't really know, I don't know how to follow what the synod is doing.
I have a question about this,
yes.
I keep them to the end.
And okay, also, if it's already included, I ask you this every single time because I'm waiting for a different answer. The idea of taking communion during your period.
It is here.
Yes, I figured. Okay.
I kept them to the last, so I can.
How do you not despair seeing how evil the world is right now, knowing that your kids are growing up in this society? Homosexuality, mass shootings, truth being relative and not absolute. How do you not despair? Actually, that's a very good question. And this question keeps coming up. But I want to ask you another question. How do you think the world looked like when Christianity was a baby? How the world that Christianity sprung up in, how did it look like? How did the Roman Empire look like? Homosexuality was normal. Cheating was acceptable. Actually, it was recommended. People were being eaten by beasts in the arenas, and people can watch them. How more violent can this become? Christians actually were some of these people being thrown to the beasts. So that's the world that Christianity grew up in. And then those Christians were able to change the world and turn it upside down. We are called to be light of the world and salt of the earth. We cannot change how the world is going, but we can witness to God in our own small worlds, person to person, and work place to place. That's all we can do. And then that has the ability to once again change the world like our fathers did in the 1st century and the 2nd century.
في some questions about submission, but I answered them. وفي واحد question about being submissive to abusive husband. I answered this morning this question, so I will not, just to save some time, I will not answer it again, but you can listen to the lecture, first lecture in the morning, I answered this question. And to add to your questions, there's another question. Why did St. Paul tell women to stay silent in the church? Actually, St. Paul, he said because women should not have authority over men. So he's speaking here about the authority of the priesthood in the liturgical context. So, for example, in the liturgy, she cannot give a sermon, she cannot preach, she should not read the gospel or the Pauline letter, etc. So when St. Paul spoke about this, he was speaking in the liturgical context and in the authoritative like teaching or preaching. That's why St. Paul said they need to be silent in the church.
There's a question here, basically I'm going to summarize. It's about women being more educated and making a lot more money than men, and some men not accepting that. So some of that goes back to part with generation, part with this culture, but that's changing though. Like I know people in my generation are more than happy for for women to make more money. So that's changing, but I think if somebody but if there's some specific persons having an issue with that, I think talking to their father of confession, their priest, can help change some of those ideologies. But it's definitely changing.
Two questions about the menstruation. There is a lot of debate recently on the law regarding menstruation and communion. Can you please clarify why women cannot take communion while menstruating? Many Sunday school girls are asking as well. وبالعربي سمعنا أن المجمع المقدس سمح للسيدة عندما تأتيها دورة شهرية بالتناول. This never happened. وكان في فيديو عشان لو اتفرجت عليه كان سجله نيافة الأنبا رفائيل. وبعد كده الفيديو ده كان عمل some confusion والناس افتكرت ان المجمع المقدس allowed women to take communion during the menstruation, and when Sayyidina Ebrahim knew that this video caused some confusion and misunderstanding, he wrote on his Facebook, I know that this video caused some confusion and misunderstanding, and he said, I want to make it clear that the Holy Synod did not approve women to take communion during this time. So I'm trying to explain this clearly, that no decision has been made by the Holy Synod regarding these issues. Some bishops acted on this on their own, but this is not the decision of the Holy Synod. I want to make this very, very clear. Actually, the committee, the medical committee that I told you about, that was formed by His Holiness, made a recommendation to the Holy Synod supporting the tradition of the Church that women should not take communion during this time. Neither men should take communion when actually there is night dreams بالنسبة لهم يعني, or wet dreams. Why? Number one, because it is a commandment. you're going to tell me, but it is Old Testament. The commandment in Old Testament are different type of commandments. في commandments like moral commandments, like the 10 commandments. These are abiding in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. I cannot say thou shalt not kill. It is Old Testament commandments, then we go and kill each other. No, it is Old Testament, but still valid in the New Testament. Actually, in the New Testament, God gave it a higher level when He say, "Don't even say to your brother, foolish one." So this type of commandment. Second type of commandment, it is called the symbolic commandments, like circumcision, like the sacrifices. All these were symbols to, or we call it types for anti-types. Circumcision is a symbol for baptism. So circumcision is called the type, baptism is the anti-type. Another command, like sacrifices and the Passover lamb, it is a symbol for communion. So now actually, while we are doing baptism, then we don't need to do circumcision, because circumcision is fulfilled. It was just a symbol. Now we don't do sacrifices like burnt offering sacrifices or sin and trespass sacrifices, because now we have communion. So all these commandments, I say, it is fulfilled in the anti-type. So the Lord made it very clear, I did not come to cancel the law, but to fulfill the law. فما حدش يقول Old Testament. في third type of commandment, it has to do with the culture, but God gave it a spiritual dimension to teach the people lesson. For example, leprosy. Why God actually told them leprosy is uncleanness? Can you imagine if the children of Israel, while they are living in the wilderness of Sinai for 40 years, if leprosy started to spread among the people, all of them would have been died in the wilderness of Sinai. That's why God told them it is unclean, even unclean spiritually, in order actually to protect the people from this epidemic to be killed in the wilderness of Sinai. And God actually used this opportunity to teach people about the uncleanness of sin. So, do you see this person who is dying from leprosy? That's what sin does to you. So now actually, with the advancement in medicine and the New Testament, like the unclean animals or clean animals, in the New Testament God said, whatever is, God gives you permission to eat it, then eat it without questioning. And He said this to Peter. And this also, can we say, it is a symbolic, because the unclean was symbol for the Gentiles and the clean was symbol for the Jews. So all these commandments about uncleanness, it is a symbol of the uncleanness of the Gentiles. How would we judge whether it is, for example, women taking communion or considered unclean or clean during communion, during the period or not, or after giving birth to a child? Here actually, how the church understood this verse and how the church decided from the first century until now, you will find that the church East and West, till 50 years ago, Catholic and Orthodox churches, both of them kept the law of women should abstain from communion during the period time and during the 40 and 80 days after giving birth to children. And as I said, it is both East and West, Orthodox and Catholic. They kept this canon. So the church understood this canon, the church understood this canon as literal and valid in the New Testament. The only change about it, the concept of uncleanness. This concept actually is not carried in the New Testament. So, if we are speaking about spiritually unclean, no, they are spiritually clean. Lakin, as Pope Shenouda used to describe it, we call them like they are not ready, not fatrin. Like مثلا when you drink tea in the morning, you cannot actually take communion. And it goes for men and women. When they have wet dreams, they don't take communion. You know, fatrin. We are not speaking about being spiritually unclean. And all these quotes from Saint Athanasius, some people quotes, all these quotes never, ever speak about whether they took communion or not. But they were speaking